asked my team, I know the Israel study this is the famous where Sanjay Gupta asked Fauci. He never gets asked about natural immunity. Well, why don't we just play it so that we can refresh the audience's memory on this? This is where he asked him about this study showing that you're more protected against COVID if you've had natural immunity than if you've had the vaccine. Do you guys have it, my team? Okay, listen.
I get calls all the time. People say, I've already had COVID. I'm protected, and now the study says maybe even more protected than the vaccine alone. Should they also get the vaccine? How do you make the case to them?
That's a really good point, Sanjay. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that. That's something that we're going to have to discuss regarding the durability of the response. The one thing the paper from Israel didn't tell you is whether or not, as high as the protection is with natural infection, what's the durability compared to the durability of a vaccine. So it is conceivable that you got infected, you're protected, but you may not be protected for an indefinite period of time. So I think that is something that we need to sit down and discuss seriously.
I mean, first of all, that's so absurd because we know that the vaccines have a limited shelf life. That's why we have to get boosters now and all that. I mean, he talks about natural immunity like that's a deficiency of it that the vaccines don't have. And that's dishonest. I mean, that's a dishonest suggestion. But the thing I wanted to ask you about is there was a Johns Hopkins study, November 23rd, 2021. By the way, that was Fauci in September claiming, we don't know. Why don't you know? In September of 2021, why don't you know about natural immunity? Come on. So November 2021, Johns Hopkins large study on natural immunity. And what it claimed to show was that antibody levels against COVID-19 stay higher for a longer time in people who were infected by the virus and then were fully vaccinated. It says the study also suggested a longer interval between infection and first vaccine dose may enhance the antibody response. But they're saying this, Johns Hopkins basically saying it will significantly enhance your immune protection if you have natural immunity to go get the vaccine.
So, Megyn, it's very important to recognize that what that study was looking at was a lab value, antibody levels. And there's this assumption built in there that the level of my antibodies automatically correlates with my level of immunity. And that assumption turns out not to be true, as anyone who has studied immunology understands. Antibody levels rise and fall with exposure to vaccines, with exposure to the virus, with re-exposure to the virus. And long-term immunity is not conferred by circulating antibodies. It's impossible for us to maintain circulating antibodies to every pathogen that we've ever encountered. If we did that, the energy requirements would be far too high, and our blood would be as thick as sludge because there would be too much protein in it, basically. So that's not how the immune system actually works. Once the antibody levels rise, they gradually diminish, whether it's from the vaccine or exposure to the virus or whatever. And long-term immunity is conferred by cells in your bone marrow, B cells, that ramp up antibody production the next time they see the virus. And also by a different branch of the immune system involving T cells, which kill cells that are infected by the virus. So it's long-term so-called memory T cells and B cells that confer long-term immunity. So this whole notion that we can measure immunity by showing that you get an antibody spike when you get the vaccine is just false. That's why it's important. That's why I look to the Israel data, because the Israel data doesn't just look at antibody levels. It says, does that actually play out into a clinically meaningful outcome, clinically meaningful differences in
let me ask you
infection,
that.
hospitalization, death?
That's my next question. So we're now, almost 2 years into this thing. They have actual humans who they can ask.
That's right.
You had COVID. How many times did you get it again?
That's right.
Did you get a, quote, breakthrough? That's what we call it when you've been vaccinated. Did you get a breakthrough infection? And I know the answer is yes for some people, but just anecdotally in my own life, it seems like far fewer had COVID twice, actually had COVID twice, then got a vaccine and then got COVID.
Yeah, no, that's correct. And that squares with all of the data. I don't think anyone would deny that so-called breakthrough infections with the vaccines are far, far more common than reinfection with natural immunity. And the rare cases of reinfection, the second case is always milder than the first, far fewer hospitalizations, no recorded deaths from reinfections after 2 years into the pandemic. So we haven't seen natural immunity decline 2 years into the pandemic, as opposed to the vaccines, which unfortunately, the vaccine efficacy starts to decline after about 4 months. And by 6 months, efficacy against infection is below 50%, below the threshold that we set for FDA authorization after only half a year. We have several studies.
Just to jump in on that, also, it doesn't appear that they do much, if anything, to prevent Omicron. I mean, right from the beginning.
Yeah. Omicron has been, I think, a little bit of a wake-up call for people to understand that with or without the vaccine, natural immunity is our way out of this pandemic. Now, the vaccines still have some efficacy. I don't want to denigrate the vaccines. I don't think there's any reason to do that. They still have some efficacy at preventing more severe symptoms and hospitalization. So people that are at risk, that's a good thing. How long that will last, we're starting to see those effects decline as well. But regardless, many people that have been vaccinated, many people that have been boosted are nonetheless getting infected with Omicron. Fortunately, most of those infections in the vaccinated and unvaccinated are mild. And what's important for people to understand is that exposure to the virus in that way will create durable immunity. And it will help you to move forward with some degree of hope that I don't need to continue living my life in fear. I don't need to continue fearing every person that I encounter as a potential threat to my health and well-being, because our immune systems are designed to deal with pathogens. The closest relative to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID, is the original SARS virus. And that virus the outbreak from that virus was now 17 years ago, almost 18 years ago. One of the interesting findings is that the natural immunity of people who got the original SARS virus is still good 17 years later.
Wow.
And in fact, there's some cross immunity against COVID. So the closest viral cousin to this particular pathogen shows long-term durable natural immunity. We have studies that go up to 10 to 12 months for natural immunity, but there's also this evidence from that prior virus that strongly suggests that natural immunity is going to last potentially indefinitely. Now, could you get a mild infection down the road, a mild reinfection down the road? Sure. But actually, every time you do that, you strengthen and broaden your immunity once again. That's how the immune system works.
Yeah. Well, we haven't been acknowledging any of that because Fauci and our public health officials are singularly focused on the vaccine, even in the wake, so far of Omicron, which they know is not prevented by the vaccine. It's not. So, why, right? But why are they so obsessed with the vaccine? Well, there's been a little wobbling on even that. I actually, for the first time with my own ears, heard the Prophet Fauci acknowledge natural immunity counts